Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. Tonight we're joined in the studio by William Duguid. William, how are you this evening?
I'm just fine. I'm toasty up here. Are you warm where you are?
It's a little bit chilly, but we will crack on with tonight's show. So, as always, we'll start with our Ukraine update. It's day 638 of the war. Ukrainian authorities have said the country cannot produce enough electricity to meet growing demand for heating and is turning to neighbouring EU countries for help, amid fears Russian strikes on production facilities. Ukrainian forces have said that Russia is throwing waves of soldiers towards the embattled Ukrainian city of Avdiivka, suffering massive losses in their attempt to capture strategically important territory on the eastern front lines. A leading Russian politician and supporter of President Vladimir Putin has denied a report that he adopted an infant who had been forcibly taken from an orphanage in Ukraine. The UK Ministry of Defence reports that a group of former Wagner mercenary soldiers have been recognised officially as Russian military veterans. Ukraine said that its export routes via Poland unblocked. Ukraine wants its export routes via Poland unblocked before it holds talks with Warsaw and the European Commission aimed at ending protests by Polish truckers that are reducing Ukrainian exports. Finland said it would close all but one crossing point on its border with Russia in an effort to halt the flow of asylum seekers to the Nordic nation, as Estonia accused Moscow of mounting a hybrid attack operation on Europe's eastern border. President Zelensky has welcomed the formation of a 20-nation coalition to boost Ukrainian air defences by Western allies, enabling our cities and villages to be better protected. Zelensky said the group was formed at a virtual meeting of the Ramstein Group examining Ukraine's military needs. Germany said it and France would be taking on leading roles. Lithuania said it delivered a new package of military aid to Ukraine comprising 3 million bullets, remote detonation systems, and winter equipment. The Romanian Black Sea port of Constanta shipped a record high to 29.4 tons of Ukrainian grain between January and October, Reuters has reported, citing the port authority. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he urged Vladimir Putin to end Moscow's war on Ukraine and withdraw all troops in the first G20 video call the Russian president has participated in since the conflict began. President Zelensky has said Ukraine's troops face difficult defensive operations on parts of the Eastern Front as winter cold settles in. Forces in the south were still conducting offensive actions, he said. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is threatening to block Ukraine's candidacy for membership of the EU. European leaders will meet on the 14th and 15th of December to discuss Ukraine's EU bid. European Council President Charles Michel said he expected a difficult meeting next month about Ukraine joining the EU. He promised to do everything in my power to bring a decision in December. The EU has approved a further €1.5 billion payment in macro financial assistance to Ukraine. It's the 10th payment made as a part of an €18 billion programme to keep the Ukrainian economy moving. So, William, the first thing I want to pick up on there is Orban and the EU. What do you think will be the kind of more wide-reaching geopolitical effects if they are able to ban or block Ukraine's accession to the EU?
I think probably it would be possible to get round them. I mean, it's something that you might expect Orban to do. He's never been a great fan of Ukraine anyway. I think at this point, Ukraine's accession to the EU, if it happens, will be largely symbolic because there's still the little matter of getting the war sorted out. So I'm not really thinking it's going to be all that important. But it would be good to have the symbolism, and it would be good not to have people interfering with it if it's the will of both parties otherwise that it should happen.
So we'll move on to our next story. Qatar. Uh, Move on to our next story, which is the latest on the Israel and Gaza conflict. Qatar announces that a ceasefire will begin at 7 a.m. on Friday, and the first hostages to be released are due at 4 p.m. on Friday. At a press conference in Doha, a Qatari foreign ministry spokesperson said that the ceasefire will begin at Friday, 7 a.m., which is 5 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and that the first hostage release of 13 hostages will be at 4 p.m. on Friday, which is 2 p.m. GMT. The Qatar Foreign Ministry spokesperson in Doha has said that they are unable, for security reasons, to discuss where hostages will be released to, but has said that the Red Cross will be involved. He did not specify how many Palestinians detained by Israel would be released in the first instance. The spokesperson said they expect aid to start moving into Gaza through the Rafah crossing as soon as the ceasefire starts. Gaza's health ministry has resumed its detailed count of casualties from the Israel-Hamas war in the territory. The director of the health ministry, Medhat Abbas, said it has documented more than 13,000 deaths and that another 6,000 people have been reported missing or are feared buried under rubble. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has urged Israel to rethink its offensive in Gaza, telling its president and prime minister the number of dead Palestinians is, quote, truly unbearable, and that the response to Hamas's terrorist attacks last month cannot include the deaths of innocent civilians, including thousands of children. On a visit to London on Wednesday, foreign ministers from Arab and Muslim countries said that the Western powers on the UN Security Council face a choice of either demanding Israel lift its stranglehold on humanitarian aid into Gaza or being complicit in Israeli war crimes and collective punishment. A spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross has told Al Jazeera that its staff were fired upon while trying to deliver humanitarian support in northern Gaza. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society has said it is deeply worried about the director of its medical clinic in Khan Yunis, who was arrested by Israeli forces and whose whereabouts are unknown. The Israeli military has said that it has detained the director of the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza for questioning. Mohammed Abu Salmiya was reported detained and other medical staff while heading south of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Health Minister Mai Al-Khail has said the arrests showed that Israel was flouting humanitarian law. The IDF says that it struck more than 300, quote, Hamas terror targets in total over the past day. In a Telegram post, the IDF said it had struck military command centers, underground terror tunnels, weapon storage facilities, weapon manufacturing sites, and anti-tank missile posts. Iran's Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdollahian has met Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, in Beirut. Israel and Hezbollah have again exchanged fire over the UN-drawn blue line that divides Israel and Lebanon. Israel claims to have intercepted multiple launches. The US says it has downed drones in the Red Sea that had been launched from Yemen. The UK Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, is in Istanbul, where he has visited Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the sites attacked by Hamas on the 7th of October in an assault. He's in Israel, not Istanbul, apologies for that, misread, in an assault that one of the survivors described as a pogrom. So, William, the first thing to pick up on for that is obviously there was talk about Hezbollah and there's talk about drones from Yemen. Is this kind of internationalization of the conflict concerning, or do you think that it's naturally what was going to happen given the politics of the region?
I think it's any expansion of the conflict is a matter for concern, and it persists. The skirmishes with Hezbollah, and particularly the drones from Yemen that I see that the US is getting into intercepting, continues the possibility that the thing will open out into a possibly even a global conflict. I nearly said a regional conflict, and I was saying gleginal, which is a weird word. But that danger is still there, and it exists as long as the pounding of Gaza goes on. The 4 day truce will just be that, a 4 day truce, and in that sense, it's almost psychological warfare, to know it's all going to start again, and that the ceasefire is not the beginning of making this stop. And that's what certainly many of the public throughout the world want, is for this to stop. And when we see things happening with Hezbollah and with Yemen, we just see there's a wider thing going on here, and it's not going to fix anything.
And what's your opinions on the statements to the Security Council and to powers within the Security Council? Do you think that the Security Council holds any actual tangible power internationally, or is it more symbolic? And do you agree with the fact that they will be, complicit in any way?
I think the Security Council, a lot of statements are made by the Security Council, various conflicts, and I think it is largely symbolic. The truth of the matter is that Israel currently has the whip hand and will do what it wishes with the complicity of the Americans and the other Western powers. That is the long and the short of it. And the Security Council can really do what it likes and say what it likes, but it will not make any great difference. There is some good uh, mediation being done by Qatar to get us to the point where we have the ceasefire, but it needs to go far beyond that. I appreciate we have a conflict that is immensely complicated and has been a feature of the world for over 75 years, well before even 1948. And it's a cycle of violence, and those are very difficult things to break. But I would like to see just more movement from the Western powers about how we might stop this happening, because at this rate, we are going to see what is effectively an ethnic cleansing of Gaza, whether Israel actually intends that or not, because the area will become uninhabitable. And then we have other problems. And on top of that, there's the potential escalation. So, yeah, I suppose I'm saying the Security Council in this case is irrelevant right now.
Yeah. So we will move on to our next story. We're bringing it back to the UK. Grangemouth refinery's future is under question. In an urgent question to the Scottish Parliament today, local MSP Michelle Thompson asked Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray what steps the Scottish Government were taking to support workers affected by the decision of Petroineos to transition the existing refinery asset into a refined fuels import terminal, highlighting the economic impact that redundancies on this scale would have on the small businesses in the surrounding town. The constituency MSP for Falkirk East also asked what engagement the Scottish Government has had with trade unions. The Secretary for Economy, Fair Work and Energy sought to reassure MSPs that the Scottish Government is continuing to engage with stakeholders during the process, and he affirmed that this was not a decision to close the refinery, but to start the necessary preparations to have the potential to transition Grangemouth into an import terminal at greater scale. The Cabinet Secretary also confirmed he had written to the Secretary of State for Energy, Security and Net Zero to outline concerns at this announcement and ask for an urgent meeting for how both governments can work together to support those affected and seeking assurances around fuel security. Commenting, Michelle Thompson, MSP, said, I welcome this response from the Cabinet Secretary at what is certain to be an anxious time for hundreds of families in the Grangemouth community who have been impacted by this news this week. Grangemouth is already a town that suffers from social deprivation exacerbated by the Tory cost of living crisis, and this news will no doubt have hundreds of workers and their families impacted, feeling anxious about the future. While it is vital we seek a just transition to net zero, Grangemouth remains an important asset to Scotland's energy future, and we must keep our skilled workers at the forefront of all decision making. I am pleased to see the Scottish Government's commitment to working towards a sustainable future for the refinery and look forward to the Just Transition Plan for Grangemouth being published in the spring. So, William, what are your thoughts on the impact that pushing towards net zero and pushing towards sustainability may have on workers in these sectors that are going to see a decline?
Well, I think the important phrase is just transition, and the timing of that is, if you like, open for debate. We absolutely have to stop drilling for oil and gas as soon as we possibly can, but we're nowhere near the point at which we can actually do that. So there needs to be a lot more planning, I think, than currently exists, so that you can retrain and reimagine the sites where the refining or indeed the drilling has been going on, and also at the same time scale up your renewable energy so that you can replace what's going. And I think we're still at really a very early stage in that. I mean, the Just Transition Plan for Grangemouth has to be now, if you like, fast tracked, because that's become a particularly acute local manifestation of the overall problem. And more to the point, it's Grangemouth right now, since we are an oil producing country, um, and that is going to happen for a little while to come at least. Grangemouth is a key area in the Scottish economy from a strategic perspective, and that needs to be sorted, and we need to understand how things are going to work going forward. It seems to me to be the latest example of our key economic and industrial areas being gradually squeezed within the union, typically by private companies within the union, but nevertheless, we're not getting the freedom to think about what our strategy might be and to put it into action. Um, it shows, I think, the weakness of our key strategic areas being in the hands of private companies and therefore subject to the whims of those companies. And this story is far from over, and it will be very interesting to see how the trade unions react and also how the Scottish Government can pull something together to try and make the best of this. Its record in doing so isn't too bad, so I'm not totally unhopeful, but we have to get over the shock phase and into the planning and reaction phase, and we need to take as many people as we can with us and see what we can make of this.
Yeah, that's pretty, yeah, on the nose. Sorry. So our next story of the night, the Scottish Government says Chancellor's autumn statement offers a worst case scenario for Scotland. So responding to the Chancellor's autumn statement, Deputy First Minister Shona Robertson has said that it has delivered the worst case scenario for Scotland's finances and failed to live up to the challenges posed by the cost of living crisis and climate crisis. The Miss Robinson said that the statement failed to deliver the investment needed in services and infrastructure while welcoming the increase in the statutory minimum wage. Ms. Robertson said this did not go far enough and fell well short of the real living wage of £12 an hour for 2024 to 25. Deputy First Minister said, "Today's autumn statement from the UK government has delivered what is the worst case scenario for Scotland's finances. Scotland needed a fair deal on investment for infrastructure, public services and pay deals. The UK government has let Scotland down on every count." We needed investment in the services that people rely on and in infrastructure vital to the economy. But the Chancellor's actions failed to live up to the challenges we are facing as a nation, while not doing enough to help those on the lowest incomes. The cut to national insurance shows the UK government has the wrong priorities at the wrong time, depriving public services of vital funding. Shockingly, the health funding announced today represents an increase of less than 0.06% to Scotland's health budget in 2023 to 24 of £19.138 billion. Ms Robinson said that the increases to state pension and local housing allowance are welcome, but warned that the increase to the minimum wage falls well short of the real living wage. She said that some of the measures for businesses are also positive, but they come in the face of UK growth having been projected downwards as a result of Brexit and the UK government's mismanagement of the economy. The Deputy First Minister said, "We will now assess the full implications of today's statement as we develop a budget that meets the needs of the people of Scotland, in line with our missions of equality, community and opportunity. The Scottish budget will be announced on the 19th of December." So, William, we obviously didn't have a show last night, so we didn't run through thoughts and feelings on the budget. So is there anything that stood out to you that was announced in the budget, in particular how it relates to Scotland? Yeah.
What stands out for me, first of all, is um, the, the fact that spending in real terms on public services is going to go down, which is absurd at a time when we absolutely need to be investing in our public services and building them up. With specific regard to the health budget within Scotland, constrained as we are, and there will be a hell of a juggling act on the 19th of December, I'm sure. I don't envy Shona Robison her challenge. 0.06% as an increase when the health service throughout the UK is absolutely on its uppers, is just incredibly short-sighted. The national insurance rise, or rather, it's a fall. The national, but the fact that you're taking in less money on national insurance doesn't in itself mean that you can't spend in public services. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like a household. And so I think that is something that stood out for me. The other thing that stood out for me was getting tough on benefits claimants. And particularly worrying was the set of statements made about people who might have disabilities and all this idea that you can just work from home. And that doesn't wash with me at all. And I am seriously concerned about a hardline approach to benefit claimants at a time when things are really tough, could make life incredibly difficult for them. And again, is completely unnecessary. So, whereas there were some decent things about the autumn statement, the overall outlook is bad. And if you look at the expected growth of the UK economy in the next few years, it's lower. The estimates are lower than they were back in March, and so things are getting worse. And I don't see how the autumn statement gets us out of this. And that is really the concern for me. They're going to flag some of the big things, like look how your national insurance payments went down, look how your minimums, although they'll call it, of course, the living wage. It's not the real living wage at all. They'll say it's gone up, and that's going to be what takes them into perhaps a May election. But in fact, it's just building in decline for the next 4 years, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I have to say it was pretty dire. So we actually stay on that thread for our next story. The IFS has said that Jeremy Hunt's tax cuts means austerity more painful than under George Osborne. Rishi Sunak's government has set the country on course for a, quote, more painful austerity drive after the next general election than during the decade of belt tightening under George Osborne, leading economists have warned. A day after the Chancellor's autumn statement, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, has said that Jeremy Hunt's £20 billion package of tax cuts was almost entirely funded by swinging real terms reductions to public spending planned from 2025. Having sought to blunt the highest tax levels since the Second World War, details contained in the Chancellor's plans showed persistently high inflation is on track to slash almost the same amount of public service spending power by 2027, with further education, local government, prisons and courts facing the steepest cuts. Whilst the government is committed to funding for key areas including the NHS, schools, defence and overseas aid, economists said unprotected departments would face deep reductions in their budgets without a rapid change in course. Paul Johnson, the director of the IFS, said the scale of the cuts would be harder to achieve because of the era of austerity kick-started by the former Chancellor Osborne when the Conservatives came to power after the financial crisis. Quote, this was painful. Doing it again will be more painful still. Mr. Osborne made his cuts after a decade of big spending increases. Mr. Hunt or his successor will have no such luxury, he said. Again, a backdrop of weaker levels of economic growth and persistently higher inflation, Hunt's autumn statement made little provision for the allocation of funding for public services after the current 3-year spending review period, which expires in March 2025. Richard Hughes, the chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility, the UK's independent economics watchdog, said there was a big question mark over the spending plans, which were unusual compared with other leading countries. The IFS said that if the government held to its funding commitments for protected departments like health and education, this implied a 1.8% cut for unprotected budgets each year from 2024 to 25 to 28 to 29, including for prisons, court systems, local government, and further education. After taking into account funding settlements for Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it said the plans implied cuts of 3.4% in England. While the government could raise public sector productivity to maintain service levels, economists doubt efficiency gains on such a scale can be achieved. So, William, would you concur with the IFS? Do you think that this plan is just going to lead to more austerity, more belt tightening, and, you know, have really negative effects knock on for the unprotected public services?
Yes, and I think possibly in that regard it might be a trap for if the Conservatives do lose the election for an incoming Labour government, because they're going to have this mess to sort out, with no doubt the Conservatives complaining about it the whole time as they do so. So yeah, I think it's a recipe for decline. I think that the tax cuts versus the real terms decrease in spending is just robbing Peter to pay Paul, and at a time when the UK public, because of fiscal drag, which is the fact that the tax thresholds are not moving, um, uh, is paying consistently higher taxes, even after the NI cuts, than really ever before. And yet we have public services in the state they are. That's quite shocking and an indictment of really the last 10 to 12 years of, of the government. And yeah, there isn't that much more belt tightening to be done. Many public services are on their knees, and even the protected areas are in bad state. I mean, the NHS throughout the UK is still trying to recover from COVID, and you really are going to have to increase the funding in order to change that. So, not a good outlook at all. And I think, like all autumn statements and budgets, the true impact of them becomes clear over the few days after the announcement. And I think you'll be hearing more of the negative side as that begins to sink in with the commentators.
So we're staying on the same kind of theme. The UK households will begin the new year with a 5% increase in energy bills after regulator Ofgem raised the price cap to an average of £1,928 a year for a typical gas and electricity bill. Ofgem raised the maximum price that energy suppliers can charge their customers from £1,834 a year for a typical household between October to December, after a rise in the global gas market prices after the start of the Israel-Hamas war last month. From January to March, the price cap will rise to £1,928 a year, which will determine the energy bills for most households. Responding to the increase in the cap, the SNP said Westminster has let down Scottish households. Dave Duguid, MP, said households across Scotland will be waking up to the realisation that the Chancellor has once again let them down before a cold and harsh winter hits. This latest forecast from Ofgem will now see household energy bills rise by a further 5%, meaning they will pay more this January than any winter before. That is why the SNP calls for a £400 energy rebate was crucial in helping households through the winter, a call that was sadly ignored. Further criticism of the UK economy came as leading economists warned households are on course to be worse off at the end of a parliamentary term for the first time in modern history, following Jeremy Hunt's £20 billion autumn statement tax cuts favoured the richest 20% of earners. The UK's leading economic think tank said Hunt's plans were predicated on a renewed austerity drive for public services, with a real-term cut in spending power of government departments that would rise to almost £20 billion a year by April 2027. The Resolution Foundation said sluggish economic growth, persistent inflation, and higher taxes meant the average household would be £1,900 poorer by January 2025 than they were in December 2019. The Resolution Foundation said the top fifth of households in Britain would gain the most from Hunt's tax cuts. It said they would benefit by £1,000 on average, 5 times the gains of the bottom 20%, who would only be £200 better off from the measures that include a 2p cut in national insurance. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said the Chancellor had almost one-for-one paid for spending cuts by slashing spending on public services after refusing to top up funding to protect against rising inflation. Paul Johnson, the IFS director, said Hunt's plans were likely to inflict more pain than the austerity drive undertaken by George Osborne in the 2010s. So I think one statistic that's really stood out for me there was the fact that these tax cuts are going to benefit the top 20% and the bottom 20% is going to lose out. Does this surprise you? Does this policy surprise you at all?
Not really. I mean, every budget, every autumn statement, whatever, involves a redistribution of wealth. But we never seem to see redistribution of wealth in favour of the less well off now. It always seems to favour the top guys. And perhaps it's predicated on if you give them the money, they'll invest it in spending on all you plebs, and it'll trickle down to you, which is nonsense. It's been debunked so many times. It's just feathering the nests of the people that don't require it, while putting people in real hardship. We say a 5% increase in the dual fuel average bill, but it's more than that because the financial support for energy bills has gone. There was an attempt to reinstate it for the coming year, but as you say, it has sadly failed. So not going to be a very happy new year for many households. And if we're ringing the bells to bring it in, we might want to be ringing particularly energetically so we can just keep warm. What we didn't have last year was a particularly cold winter. Who's to say, maybe with global warming, we won't have cold winters again. But it's only going to take one cold snap of any prolonged nature, and there's going to be big trouble. And none of this is the making of a successful economy. If people don't have money, they can't spend money, and the economy doesn't grow, and your decline just continues. So, not good news at all. And just say one last thing. Please, I know a review has started, but can we do something about standing charges? It's ridiculous, and particularly it's ridiculous in Scotland, where we pay higher standing charges than just about anywhere in the UK, and we are the guys who actually create most of the electricity. It's absurd. So that would be just one last thing. Maybe the review will bring about a resolution of that, but I am not holding my breath.
Yeah. So we'll move on to our next story. A man has been detained after allegedly stabbing 3 children and 2 adults near a school in central Dublin. The incident happened at about 1:30 p.m. on Thursday, close to Gael School, a primary school at Parnell Square East, a bustling part of Ireland's capital. 3 young children and a man and a woman were taken to hospital, and one of the children, a girl, and the women sustaining serious injuries. Police detained a suspect and are understood to have retrieved a large knife. I'm deeply shocked and sad by the appalling attack on the 3 innocent children and a woman in Dublin today, the Justice Minister Helen McEntee said in a statement. All our thoughts are with those injured, especially with the children, during their parents and families during this extremely difficult period. Garda are following a definite line of inquiry and are not looking for any other person at this time, she said. This attack has shocked us all, and I have no doubt that the person responsible will be brought to justice. However, my thoughts are now with the innocent children and the women who have been attacked, their families, and those who are caring for them at this time. Moving over to Europe, the Netherlands is facing complex and potentially lengthy coalition talks as Geert Wilders, whose far-right anti-Islam Party for Freedom, the PVV, is expected to be the largest in the Dutch parliament in a shock election result, vowed to try to become the Prime Minister and call for a referendum on its membership of the EU. In an electoral upset whose reverberations will be felt across Europe, and that was welcomed by far-right leaders, including France's Marine Le Pen and Hungary's Viktor Orban, the PVV won 37 out of 150 seats in Parliament, more than double its previous number. Its manifesto included calls for bans on mosques, the Quran, and the wearing of Islamic headscarves in government buildings. Wilders will need other parties to join him in a coalition to govern with majority support in Parliament. A coalition of Wilders' PVV, the VVD of the outgoing Conservative Prime Minister Mark Rutte, and the NSC party of the centrist lawmaker Pieter Omtzigt would have 81 seats combined, but neither potential partner would be willing to leave the EU or violate Dutch constitutional guarantees on the freedom of religion. Coalition talks are expected to take months. Party leaders will meet to decide on an informateur or explorer, a political outsider, who will hear from each party what possibilities they see and prefer in coalition talks. Frans Timmermans, the head of the new Green Left/Labour alliance that won 25 seats, told a party meeting that he would focus on opposition. People who are worried should know that the Green Left/Labour is on their side, and we will come together to fight shoulder to shoulder. People from today, the campaign begins, is what he said. The shape of the new coalition could have a significant impact on the Netherlands' immigration and climate policies and its relations with its EU partners. The country was a founding member of the EU and punches above its weight in the bloc. Anti-fascist demonstrations have been planned in Amsterdam and Utrecht for Thursday evening. One woman told the broadcaster NOS that PVV is the biggest party, makes me ashamed to be Dutch. Although the party that wins the most seats traditionally provides the next prime minister, it is by no means guaranteed to do so. Rutte will remain in the caretaker role until a new government is installed, which may not be before next spring. So, William, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this. Populism in the right wing has been a huge topic of conversation when you've seen Orban and Le Pen. You know, what is going to be the impact of this? And, you know, is it dangerous? Is it something that everyone should be concerned about?
I think the rise of the far right, and particularly in Europe, but not just in Europe. Obviously, we've got new guy Javier Milei in Argentina. But we've, as you said, we've got Orban in Hungary. We've got Giorgia Meloni in Italy now. We've got Marine Le Pen waiting in the wings in France. And it's all down to it's really a concoction of events and trends. But one of the things that really seems to be pushing this is scaremongering about migration and asylum seekers and immigration. And that is something that is baked into the world over the next 20 years. There is going to be a significant movement of people as the world heats up and areas become uninhabitable. And we have to get our heads round how we live together on this planet. It's not just that, though. Overall trust in politicians, not just in the UK, and I'm increasingly surprised to see it, but it is true. Overall trust in politicians seems to be dissipating. And it's notable that the peoples of the world, many countries, are out of sympathy with their leaders when it comes to things like protesting about what's going on in Gaza. And I don't know where that's going to go over the next few weeks and months, because if you're dissatisfied with your politicians, that's great, but sometimes it can lead to some unintended consequences. Trump will be maybe coming in the US next year, so that's just another log to put on the fire. So yes, I am concerned about this. I'm a great fan of the Netherlands. I lived there for 2 years at about 17 years ago when I was working, and I enjoyed it. And you know, they got Scottish people, which was fine. I always introduced myself as Scottish rather than English, and that worked a treat. So I'm sad to see the likely division that seems to be going on there. And I hope that a coalition can be arrived at that kind of works. And I rather hope that it does not include Wilders, but not at the cost of making him a sort of political martyr. But it could take, as you say, a very long time. In 2021, it took them 271 days. And it could be just as bad this time. So maybe Mark Rutte will be the caretaker for quite some time to come.
271 days. That's an incredibly long time. I did not know that. So we will move on to our next story. The Scottish Government is expanding Scotland's medical workforce. Record levels of investment will see an additional 153 trainee doctor posts created next year in what will be the largest annual expansion on record. This level of expansion represents a 2.3% increase above the current whole-time equivalent workforce of 6,570 trainees. The additional posts, costing £42 million over the next 4 years, are being funded by the Scottish Government to help meet growing demand in a number of key specialities. NHS Education for Scotland recommended uplifts in 24 different specialities overall, including anaesthetics, emergency medicine, general practice, intensive care medicine, paediatrics, psychiatry and surgery. Successful applicants will take up their posts in August 2024. Health Secretary Michael Matheson said, "Funding for these additional places will help to relieve some of the pressures currently facing our health industry. The level of expansion taking place in 2024, the largest ever, shows the Scottish Government's continued investment and commitment to ensure that our health service is equipped to deliver timely and effective care to those who need it. Under this government, NHS staffing is at a historically high level, up by around 29,100 whole-time equivalent. So I guess, William, the biggest contrast here that we see in this story to the story about the autumn budget and the tax cuts, what does that show you about the difference in attitudes towards the NHS by the Scottish Government and by the Westminster Government?
I think the Scottish Government is doing its very best with the health service, and we must remember that in terms of its overall performance, although it is in trouble, it is the best performing in the UK, and that's being done from a completely constrained budget. So this is a sort of small change, but it's still significant because it's building up the capacity at a time when I suspect that in other parts of the UK it will be decreasing. But we've got to remember it's being done against the background of a real terms increase in the Scottish health budget. The money comes from Westminster basically of just 0.06%. So it's going to be tight, and it's possible that there may have to be some accommodation with other parts of the health service or with spending generally. It's a difficult juggling act that Shona Robertson is going to have on the 19th of December, and it's had a good effect that they've been able to do this and keep this continuing fueling of the capacity of the health service. So hats off for that. But rocky road's still ahead. Let's hope that they can make that journey.
And obviously, they're creating these jobs, but how can the Scottish Government help to promote them and encourage people to take jobs within the NHS, obviously in the background of strikes action and the cost of living crisis and cuts and everything, like you said? How can these jobs be made appealing and appealing to people who may be applying to them?
They have to build the culture of the health service. Remember, they've had a good record in avoiding strikes this year, unlike in England, and that's I think in some measure down to the kind of culture they promote in the health service. I think also possibly the financial constraints are forcing them to be quite innovative about how they deliver healthcare in a way that may not be happening in other places, and that's to be encouraged as well. But it's all down to how you get across the workforce that you've got a project and you're moving forward, and it mustn't always be in retreat. And I think in that regard, the Scottish Government is still doing fairly well. Long way to go, but I think if you're in something positive, then you want to stay part of it.
Mm-hmm. So we'll move on to our penultimate story of the night. The Scottish Government External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson is visiting China. On a visit to China this week, Angus Robertson will explore opportunities to revitalise relations and promote business, tourism and people-to-people ties. As well as meetings with senior Chinese government representatives, Mr. Robertson will meet alumni of Scottish universities to speak with business leaders about energy and the green transition, as well as discussing the shared challenge of the dual climate biodiversity crisis and poverty alleviation. Mr. Robertson will also celebrate St Andrew's Day during his visit. This will be the first time a Scottish Government ministerial visit is happening to the country since 2019. Mr. Robertson said, "I look forward to visiting Beijing, Kunming and Shanghai and promoting Scotland as an open, connected and outward-looking country with a long history of intellectual, cultural and economic exchange with China. During my visit, which also coincides with St Andrew's Day celebrations, I will have an opportunity to share our cultural traditions, as well as the chance to learn more about China's culture and our connections." So, William, how important is it for Scottish Government ministers to be seen on a global stage and to interact with high-ranking officials from other countries to almost promote Scotland on the kind of international global scene?
We have to promote ourselves, that's for sure. And if we want to have aspirations to be an independent country, we have to be recognisable as reaching out to the international community. So that, I presume, is what Angus Robertson is doing here. It has to be said that he's faced some criticism for engaging with China, including from within his own party. And there are concerns that he may not be. It doesn't say in the press release that he's going to raise, for example, human rights and security issues. That doesn't mean he won't. It just doesn't say it in the press release. I would imagine if he did raise those matters, he'd be criticised for that, because that's the way the press tends to operate. So yes, it's good to reach out, and I think it's noticeable that the UK are so worried about it that they insist on such visits being accompanied by a UK diplomat, just in case he starts talking about independence. I'm sure he's got lots to talk about that may not include that. In terms of other engagement with China, uh, James Cleverly of the UK government had an engagement with China this summer. He got a bit of flack for that, but the UK should be doing that too. And of course, Lord David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, famously had the Chinese premier at a pub close to Chequers. And a right good night out, I'm sure that was. So there's plenty of history here. And yeah, I hope it's a successful visit. And there are strong links with China in terms of Chinese students and other exchanges. So it's worth doing. Yes, you need to think about the human rights side of things and sort of field that, but actually making Scotland a visible player on the world stage is not a bad thing to be doing at all.
And are there any other countries that you would like to see this kind of diplomatic relation start with or continue with?
I think we should be continuing to engage with the EU big time. And I think I'm not sure I quite would like to see us going to Moscow just yet. I don't have a shopping list. I just think that Scotland should be punching above its weight, and I think we are doing here.
So we'll move on to our final story of the night. Game On, an exhibition conceived and curated by Barbican Immersive, examines the creative and technological advances that have established a new medium and art form. In Game On, visitors explore gaming's rich history and playing many of the key games produced over the last 50 years. The exhibition will open over 20 years after the National Museum of Scotland was its very first touring venue in October of 2002, after its initial opening run at the Barbican in London. Since then, over 5 million people of all ages have visited this highly interactive exhibition in 24 cities around the world. Patrick Moran, Game On Associate Curator, said the gaming world has an undeniable social, cultural, and technological impact. Games transcend the boundaries between art and technology, becoming a part of popular culture. Game On presents the opportunity to not only see the evolution of video games, but also how they have diversified. But also it lets you immerse yourself inside the gaming world, allowing you to play over 100 playable games. The show features the largest playable collection in the world, including original arcade, hand, and console games, including Pac-Man, Super Mario, Tetris, Minecraft, Just Dance, and FIFA. The exhibition also explores explores new advances in the gaming world. Highly interactive, all-action, groundbreaking, and popular, Game On is engaging for hardcore gamers and visitors new to gaming. The show is suitable for all players of all ages. The exhibition, which features iconic characters and games ranging from Space Invaders to Sonic the Hedgehog and Mario Kart and Mario to Minecraft, will run from the 29th of June to the 3rd of November 2024 at the National Museum of Scotland. William, will you be going to this? Are you a big gamer? Is this something that floats your boat?
I'm a great fan of University Challenge, but the one category of questions I can never hope to even approach the answer to is when it brings up video games. So when they say this is suitable for people of all ages, I'm not sure about this 63-year-old being able to hack it. It would be interesting to go. It would be a kind of alien world for me. Don't get me wrong, I'm a great fan of Scotland having such a big voice in the video gaming industry, and Dundee, there's been some tremendous work done. And Scotland apparently was the first location of the exhibition in 2002 after it had been to the Barbican. And so it's now a kind of tradition, really. So yeah, I might go in disguise and not and pretend I know things, but good luck to them, and may it be a successful exhibition, and may it draw the crowds, particularly at Edinburgh Festival time.
True. I can't say I know anything about gaming, but I would like to learn. So I will be toddling across to Edinburgh to see that. So that concludes the show tonight. William, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Thank you very much. And
thanks. Yeah, sorry for the occasional incoherence tonight, but there we go. It's been an interesting evening.
There's been no incoherence. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our viewers and our supporters. So to everyone who's donated and to everyone who already has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programmes will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We really need to reach that £30,000 target, and it is really pressing. Due to the generosity of you, our supporters, our subscribers, we have raised over £21,000. However, the need to raise the The need to raise the remaining amount is really urgent. Bit of a tongue twister. I'm Saoirse Healey. Good night, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healey.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We're committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.